The August sun beat down mercilessly on the Nebraska plains, turning the earth into a fine powder that rose with every step. Clara Whitmore stumbled through the sagebrush, her torn dress catching on thorns, her lips cracked from 3 days without proper water. The last town was 20 miles behind her, and ahead stretched nothing but endless prairie and the wavering heat mirages that played tricks on desperate eyes. She'd eaten her last piece of hardtack yesterday morning. The berries she'd found near a dried creek bed had turned her stomach sour, leaving her weaker than before, but stopping meant dying. And Clara had not come this far to surrender to the wilderness. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood, she spotted it, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. Her heart quickened. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. People meant food, even if she had to beg for it or steal it. The Hartwell Ranch sat like a lonely sentinel against the vast emptiness, its weathered buildings huddled together as if for protection against the endless space. Clara crouched behind a cluster of rabbit brush, studying the layout. A main house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, a well with a rope and bucket, and there, a chicken coop. She waited until full darkness fell, watching for signs of life. Only one lamp burned in the house, moving from window to window before finally settling in what must be the kitchen. One person, then, good. She'd learned to move like a ghost these past weeks, silent as the prairie wind. The chickens stirred softly as she eased open the coop door, but they were accustomed to nighttime visits from foxes and coyotes and paid her little mind. Clara's fingers found the warm eggs nestled in the straw, and she carefully placed them in the fold of her skirt. 4 eggs. It would keep her alive another day, maybe 2 if she was careful. She was reaching for a 5th when the cold press of metal against her temple froze her blood. "Stand up slow," a voice commanded, low and rough as sandpaper. "Hands where I can see them." Clara's fingers trembled as she rose, the eggs threatening to spill from her makeshift pouch. In the moonlight, she could make out the man holding the rifle, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from granite and eyes that held no warmth. His clothes were well-worn but clean, and he stood with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to use the weapon in his hands. "You're stealing from me," Jed Hartwell stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Clara lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. She'd learned that showing fear only made men crueler. The moonlight caught her face, hollow cheeks, eyes too large from hunger, but still defiant. "Yes." The simple admission seemed to catch him off guard. His finger remained on the trigger, but something flickered in his expression. "Turn around and walk to the house," he ordered. Clara didn't move. Instead, she looked him straight in the eye, her voice barely above a whisper but steady as stone. "Punish me if you want to." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with resignation and a strange kind of challenge. Jed Hartwell had seen many things in his 40 years, claim jumpers, cattle thieves, murderers fleeing justice, but he'd never seen anyone meet their fate with such quiet acceptance. Especially not a woman who looked like she'd been chewed up and spit out by the prairie itself. "I said move," he repeated, but the steel in his voice had softened imperceptibly. Clara took a step forward, then another. The eggs in her skirt made a soft sound as they shifted. "I won't run," she said. "Got nowhere to run to." Jed walked behind her, rifle still raised, but his mind was working in ways it hadn't for years. She was young, maybe 25, though hardship had a way of aging people out here. Her dress had once been blue, he could tell, though now it was the color of dust and desperation. No wedding ring, but a pale band of skin on her finger where one had been. Inside the house. He gestured to a chair at the kitchen table. Clara sat, still cradling the eggs in her lap like precious gems. The lamplight revealed more scratches on her arms from thorns, sunburn peeling from her nose, the kind of thinness that came from too many missed meals. Jed set the rifle against the wall but kept it within reach. He studied her, trying to reconcile the thief in his kitchen with the woman who'd practically asked for death rather than beg for mercy. "When's the last time you ate?" The question surprised them both. Clara's jaw tightened. "Does it matter?" "Answer the question." "Day before yesterday. Some berries." She paused. "They weren't good berries." Against his better judgment, Jed found himself moving to the stove. He'd made beans and cornbread for supper, and there was plenty left. He filled a plate and set it before her, along with a cup of water. Clara stared at the food like it might disappear. Her hands shook as she reached for the spoon. "Eat slow," he warned. "You'll make yourself sick otherwise." She nodded, forcing herself to take small bites even as her body screamed for her to devour everything at once. Jed sat across from her, watching. It had been 3 years since anyone else had sat at this table. 3 years since the riders had come through, leaving nothing but ashes and graves behind. "What's your name?" he asked when she'd eaten half the plate. "Clara." No last name offered. And he didn't push. "You running from the law, Clara?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "The law? No, the law doesn't care what happens to women like me." The way she said it, flat and matter-of-fact, told him more than any explanation could have. He'd seen that look before, in the eyes of cavalry horses that had been ridden too hard for too long. "You can sleep in the barn tonight," he said finally. "There's clean straw in the loft. In the morning, you'll work for what you ate and what you tried to steal. Then you move on." Clara nodded, setting down the spoon with careful precision. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I work my hands hard, and I'll expect the same from you." "I'm not afraid of work." "Good." He stood, picking up the rifle. "Because come dawn, you'll prove it." As he led her to the barn, Jed found himself wondering why he hadn't simply turned her over to Sheriff Watson in town. Maybe it was the way she'd faced that gun barrel without flinching. Maybe it was the matter-of-fact way she'd admitted her crime. Or maybe it was because for the first time in 3 years, he'd remembered what it felt like to be human again. The barn was warmer than the open prairie, and the straw in the loft was soft and clean. Clara climbed the ladder carefully, still weak from hunger. Below, Jed hung a lantern on a hook. "Don't try to run," he said. "There's nothing but empty land for 50 miles in any direction, and I'll find you." "I told you," Clara replied, looking down at him from the loft. "I've got nowhere to run to." As he walked back to the house, Jed Hartwell tried to shake the feeling that something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. For 3 years, he'd lived like a ghost on his own land, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. Now there was a stranger in his barn, a woman who looked at death like an old friend and carried secrets in her eyes as vast as the prairie itself. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the empty plates she'd left behind. Tomorrow, he told himself, she'd work and then be gone. Life would return to its predictable emptiness. But even as he thought it, he knew it was a lie. Some people carried change with them like a scent, and Clara, whoever she was, wherever she'd come from, was one of them. Outside, the coyotes began their nightly chorus, and the wind whispered secrets through the grass. And in the barn, a woman who'd forgotten how to hope curled into the straw and slept without dreams for the first time in weeks. The rooster's crow pierced the pre-dawn darkness, but Clara was already awake. Her body, accustomed to sleeping light and waking frightened, had stirred at the first hint of gray in the eastern sky. She climbed down from the loft, her muscles protesting after the first real rest she'd had in weeks. Jed Hartwell stood waiting by the barn door, a pail in one hand and that same unreadable expression on his face. In the early morning light, she could see him more clearly, the premature gray threading through his dark hair, the deep lines carved around his eyes, the way he held himself like a man carrying invisible weight. "Chickens need feeding," he said without preamble. "Then the horses, well needs new rope hauled up from the cellar. After that, there's wash needs doing." Clara nodded, taking the pail. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, and she noticed his hands, scarred and calloused, but surprisingly gentle in their movements. She worked without complaint as the sun climbed higher, turning the cool morning into another blazing day. The chickens clustered around her feet as she scattered feed, and she found herself murmuring to them, nonsense words she hadn't spoken since she was a child. The horses, 2 sturdy quarter horses and an aging mare, regarded her with cautious interest as she filled their water troughs. From the porch, Jed watched her work. She moved efficiently despite her obvious exhaustion, never shirking even the heaviest tasks. When the well rope proved too heavy, she wrapped it around her waist and pulled with her whole body, determination etched in every line of her face. At midday, he called her to the house. She'd been scrubbing his shirts and pants with lye soap, her hands red and raw from the harsh mixture. A plate of biscuits and salt pork waited on the porch steps, along with a jar of cool water. Clara ate like she had the night before, forcing herself to go slow, to savor each bite. Jed leaned against the porch post, whittling a piece of wood with slow, methodical strokes. "You weren't lying about not being afraid of work," he observed. She swallowed carefully before answering. "Work never killed anybody. Other things do that just fine." "Speaking from experience?" Clara's eyes found the horizon, where the land met the sky in an endless line. "We all got experience with something." They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds the scrape of his knife against wood and the distant call of a hawk. Finally, she set down the empty plate and started to rise. "I'll finish the wash, then be on my way." Where? The simple question stopped her. Where indeed? West, probably. California, maybe. Where a woman could disappear into the goldfields or the cities springing up along the coast. Anywhere but back. "Away," she said finally. "You got money for supplies? Food? Water?" Her silence was answer enough. Jed stood, brushing wood shavings from his pants. "Fence needs mending along the north pasture. Take you a week, maybe 2, board and meals included." Clara studied him, searching for the catch. Men didn't offer help without wanting something in return, but his face remained impassive, giving nothing away. "Why?" he shrugged. "Prairie's hard enough without sending folk out to die on it." That night, she slept in the barn again, but this time with a proper blanket and a small store of provisions. Hardtack, dried beef, a canteen of water, just in case. He'd said, though in case of what, neither of them voiced. Through a gap in the barn wall, Clara could see the house, long after dark. That single lamp moved from room to room, and she wondered what ghosts kept Jed Hartwell walking his empty halls at night. The next morning established what would become their routine. Dawn work with the animals, breakfast eaten in companionable silence. Then out to the fence line where twisted wire and rotted posts told the story of years of neglect. Clara learned to stretch wire taut, to dig post holes in the hard-packed earth, to ignore the bite of metal against her palms. Jed worked alongside her most days, though he spoke little. She learned more from what he didn't say, the way his jaw tightened when he looked toward a grove of cottonwoods near the creek, how he always kept his rifle within reach, the careful distance he maintained between them. On the 4th night, a summer storm rolled across the prairie. Clara huddled in the loft, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and watching lightning illuminate the landscape in stark, momentary glimpses. Between thunder rolls, she heard something else, the sound of wood splintering. She peered out to see Jed in the yard, soaked to the skin, frantically trying to cover a hole that had opened in the chicken coop roof. Without thinking, she grabbed a piece of canvas from the barn and ran to help. Together they fought the storm, holding the canvas while he nailed it down, both of them shouting to be heard over the wind. When it was done, they stood in the driving rain, exhausted and drenched. "Get inside," he yelled, pointing to the house. This time she didn't argue. They stumbled onto the porch, water streaming from their clothes. Inside, Jed built up the fire while Clara stood shivering, unsure what to do. "There's clothes in the back bedroom," he said without looking at her. "They'll be too big, but they're dry." The bedroom was clearly unused, dust thick on every surface, A woman's dresses still hung in the wardrobe, and Clara's hand hesitated before touching them. She chose a simple cotton dress, faded but clean, and tried not to think about who had worn it before. When she emerged, Jed had coffee brewing and had changed into dry clothes himself. He handed her a cup without comment, and they sat by the fire, steam rising from their damp hair. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For the clothes." His knuckles whitened around his own cup. They weren't doing any good hanging there. Clara recognized the pain in his voice. She'd heard it in her own often enough. Loss was a language spoken fluently on the frontier. "How long?" she asked softly. 3 years. The words came out clipped. Final. She nodded, sipping the bitter coffee. "Mine's been gone 6 months, though he was dead to me long before that." Jed's eyes flicked to her face, reading the implication. "He hurt you?" It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Every day for 2 years. Said it was his right as a husband. Law agreed with him." "That why you ran?" "I ran because he was fixing to kill me. Got drunk one night, put his hands around my throat, and I saw my death in his eyes." Her fingers unconsciously touched her neck. "I waited till he passed out, took what little money he had, and left. Been moving ever since." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. Outside, the storm was passing, thunder grumbling its way eastward. "He looking for you?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Harrison Briggs don't like losing his property." "Yeah, he's looking." Jed stood abruptly, moving to the window. "You should have said, if he comes here." "He won't." She joined him at the window, looking out at the rain-washed night. "I've been careful. Besides, it's a big territory. Not big enough sometimes." They stood there, 2 damaged souls reflected in the dark glass, until the fire burned low and exhaustion drove them to their separate quarters. Him to his empty house, her to the barn that had become her temporary haven. But that night, Clara didn't immediately climb to the loft. Instead, she stood at the barn door, watching the house. The lamp made its restless journey from room to room, and she understood now what drove him. Guilt was a harsh taskmaster, and the dead never stopped asking why. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of him, standing alone in what must have been the kitchen, his hands braced on the table, head bowed as if in prayer or surrender. In that moment, he looked as lost as she felt, and Clara realized why he'd let her stay. Loneliness recognized loneliness. Pain recognized pain, and sometimes that recognition was enough to keep 2 people from drowning in their own sorrows, at least for a little while. The days stretched into weeks, and the fence along the north pasture grew straight and strong under their combined efforts. Clara's hands hardened with calluses, her arms strengthened from hauling wire and digging holes, and the hollow look of starvation gradually left her face. She still slept in the barn, but more and more of her time was spent in Jed's company, working side by side under the vast prairie sky. It was the horse that changed things. The mare, Buttercup, had been favoring her left rear leg for days. Jed had examined it repeatedly, finding nothing obvious, and his frustration showed in the tight set of his shoulders as he watched the animal limp around the corral. "Let me look," Clara offered one evening. He stepped aside with a skeptical grunt. Clara approached the mare slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. Her hands ran gently down the leg, feeling for heat or swelling. When she reached the hoof, she carefully lifted it, examining the underside. "Stone bruise," she announced, pointing to a dark spot on the sole. "See here? Must have happened a while back. It's gone deep." She spent the next hour preparing a poultice of herbs she'd gathered from the creek bank, things her grandmother had taught her about before the world turned hard. With infinite patience, she packed the hoof and wrapped it carefully. "Where'd you learn that?" Jed asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his usual reserve. "My grandmother. She had a way with animals." Clara stroked Buttercup's neck. "Said they were more honest than people. Never knew her to be wrong about that." Over the following days, she tended the mare faithfully. Each evening, she changed the poultice, speaking to Buttercup in that same gentle voice, until the limp faded and the horse was sound again. Jed watched it all with something shifting in his expression, a softening around the edges of his carefully maintained distance. The change in routine came gradually. Instead of eating in silence, they began to talk. Small things at first. The weather, the work that needed doing, observations about the animals. Then, slowly, bigger things crept in. Clara spoke of her childhood in Missouri before her parents died of fever. Jed mentioned his time in the cavalry, though he skirted around why he'd left. One afternoon, working on a particularly stubborn fence post, Clara caught her sleeve on a loose wire. The fabric tore, revealing the faded purple-green remnants of old bruises along her upper arm. She quickly tried to fold the torn edges together, but Jed had already seen. His face darkened like a storm cloud. "He did that?" Clara kept her eyes on the fence. "It's old. Doesn't matter now." "The hell it doesn't." The fury in his voice made her look up. His jaw was clenched, hands fisted at his sides. "What kind of man?" "The kind the law protects." She cut him off. "The kind who owns a woman-like property and can do what he likes with what's his." Jed yanked the fence post out of the ground with more force than necessary. "That's not ownership. That's—" He stopped, struggling for words. "That's the world." Clara finished quietly. "At least the world I knew." They worked in tense silence after that, but she could feel his anger radiating like heat from a stove. It wasn't directed at her, she realized with surprise. He was angry for her, and that was something she'd never experienced before. That night, she found a package on her barn ladder. New clothes, sturdy and practical. Work dresses, a pair of men's trousers for fence work, good leather gloves to protect her hands. No note, but none was needed. The storm came sudden and fierce, as prairie storms do. This time it brought hail, chunks of ice the size of marbles pelting down with vicious force. Clara was in the barn when it started, but through the din she heard something else, the panicked screaming of horses. She ran outside to find the corral gate swinging open, spooked by a lightning strike on a nearby cottonwood. The 2-quarter horses were racing toward the open prairie, but Buttercup, confused and frightened, was circling wildly near the burning tree. Without thinking, Clara grabbed a rope and ran toward the mare. Hail stung her face and arms, but she pressed forward. Behind her, she heard Jed shouting her name, but the wind tore the words away. The mare reared as Clara approached, eyes rolling white with fear. Clara stood her ground, rope loose in her hands, making herself small and unthreatening. "Easy, girl. Easy now. It's just noise and light. You're safe." Lightning cracked again, illuminating the scene in stark relief. In that moment, Jed saw something that stopped his heart. Not fear in Clara's face, but absolute calm. She moved like water, flowing with the horse's panic instead of against it, until her hand found Buttercup's neck. The mare stilled, trembling. Clara slipped the rope over her head and led her away from the burning tree, back toward the barn. Only when the horse was secure did she collapse against the barn wall, hail-battered and exhausted. Jed was there in an instant, hands running over her arms, her face, checking for serious injury. "Are you insane? You could have been killed." She was scared, Clara said simply. "So was I," he admitted, the words torn from him. His hand stilled on her cheek, thumb brushing away a mixture of rain and blood from a small cut. "God help me, Clara. I was scared." They were close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, feel the warmth of his breath. The storm raged around them, but in that small space between their bodies, there was sudden stillness. "Jed," she whispered. He pulled back abruptly, as if burned. "Get inside. You're bleeding." In the house, he tended her cuts with surprising gentleness. His fingers shook slightly as he cleaned a gash on her forearm, and Clara watched his face, the war between wanting and restraint playing out in his expression. "I'm not hurt," she said softly. His hand stilled. "What?" "Your wife. I'm not her. You can't save her by saving me." Jed's face went white, then red. He stood abruptly, turning away. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Clara rose too, facing his back. I see how you look at those cottonwoods by the creek. I see the guilt eating at you every night when you walk that house like a ghost. I know what it's like to carry the dead with you. Stop. You think you should have been here. Think you could have stopped whatever happened. But Jed, he spun around, eyes blazing. They came while I was in town getting supplies. Sarah tried to run with Emma, our daughter. Made it as far as those trees before they caught them. I found them 3 days later when I got back. 3 days. Clara, they'd been there 3 days. And I was drinking whiskey in town, playing cards, while his voice broke. Clara moved without thinking, pulling him into her arms. He resisted for a moment, then crumbled. This strong man who'd held himself together with will alone for 3 years. They stood there in the lamplight, two broken souls holding each other up, while outside the storm spent its fury and moved on. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clear. "I'm sorry," he said roughly. "Don't be." Clara touched his face gently. "We're all carrying something. Doesn't make us weak to set it down sometimes." That night, when she headed for the barn, he caught her hand. "Stay." It wasn't desire in his voice, but something rawer need, the need not to be alone with the ghosts. Not tonight. Clara stayed. They sat by the fire until it burned to embers. Not talking, not touching, just being. And when exhaustion finally drove them to rest, she took the spare room while he retreated to his own. But the walls between them, both physical and emotional, had begun to crumble. And in the days that followed, neither of them tried very hard to rebuild them. The trouble started with Ezra Holcomb's wagon breaking down near the ranch. Jed had gone to help, leaving Clara to tend the animals. She was drawing water from the well when she heard the approaching horses. 3 riders coming fast from the direction of town. She recognized the type immediately. The self-important swagger of men who appointed themselves guardians of morality. The lead rider, a thick-necked man with badge pinned crooked on his vest, dismounted with practiced authority. "You'd be the woman staying at the Hartwell place," he announced rather than asked. Clara set down the water bucket carefully. "I work here." That what they're calling it now? The second man, younger with mean eyes, smirked. "Heard tell Hartwell's got himself a woman living in sin out here. I sleep in the barn. I work for meals and shelter. Nothing sinful about honest work." The third man, older and weathered, studied her with sharp intelligence. "You running from something, miss, or someone?" Clara met his gaze steadily. "Last I heard, it wasn't illegal to work for wages in Nebraska." "Depends on the kind of work," Mean Eyes suggested, earning a sharp look from the older man. "That's enough. Calvin," Badge said, "we're just checking on things, making sure everything's proper. Wouldn't want folks getting the wrong idea about what goes on out here." "Then I suggest those folks mind their own business," Clara said coolly. Badge's face reddened. "Now see here." The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut him off. Jed rode in fast, rifle across his saddle, face like thunder. He dismounted in one fluid motion, positioning himself between Clara and the men. "Afternoon, Frank, boys." His voice was pleasant enough, but his hand rested on his rifle stock. "Something I can help you with?" Frank, Badge, shifted uncomfortably. "Just checking on things. Jed, heard you had a visitor." "I have a hired hand. She works. I pay her. That a problem?" "Some folks in town are talking." "Let them talk." Jed's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. "Long as they do it in town and not on my land." Calvin couldn't resist pushing. Just seemed strange. A woman appearing out of nowhere. No family, no references. "Like my Sarah when she came to town?" Jed asked softly. "She was running from something too. You all seemed happy enough to welcome her then." The mention of Sarah cast a pall over the group. Everyone remembered the young widow who'd captured Jed Hartwell's heart. How happy they'd been before the raiders came. The older man cleared his throat. "We should go, Frank." But Frank wasn't done. "If she's running from the law." "She's not," Jed stated flatly. "And even if she was, since when do you care about what happens outside Madison County? You sure didn't care enough to form a posse when those raiders came through 3 years ago." The accusation hung heavy in the air. Frank's face went from red to purple. "Now that ain't fair. Jed, by the time we knew, get off my land." The 3 men mounted up, but Calvin couldn't resist a parting shot. "Better watch yourself. Hartwell, that woman's trouble. Can see it in her eyes." After they left, Jed stood rigid, staring after them. Clara touched his arm gently. "I'll go," she said quietly. "I don't want to bring you trouble." He turned on her, eyes blazing. "You'll do no such thing. They'll talk. They'll make things difficult for you. Let them try." He stalked toward the house, then stopped, not looking back. "You're not running anymore. Clara, not from them, not from anyone." That evening, she found him sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the road. She sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance. "Tell me about Sarah," she said. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She came to town 5 years ago. Widow from Kansas. Husband died in a farm accident. Had nothing but the clothes on her back and more courage than sense." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Worked at the mercantile. Lived in the back room. I'd find excuses to go to town just to buy things I didn't need." Clara smiled at the image. "How long before you courted her?" 6 months before I worked up the nerve to ask her to a church social. Another 6 before I proposed." His hands tightened on the rifle. "We had 3 good years. Emma came along in the 2nd year. Perfect little thing, bright as a button. Had Sarah's smile and my stubborn streak. The men who... were they caught? No. The word was flat, final. Tracked them for 2 weeks before the trail went cold. Sheriff said they probably headed for Mexico. Said there was nothing to be done. They sat in companionable silence as darkness fell. Finally. Clara stood to go inside, but Jed's voice stopped her. "That man today, Calvin, he wasn't wrong. You're trouble." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw not accusation but wonder. "Trouble for the peace I made with being dead inside. Trouble for the walls I built. That kind of trouble. Maybe it's not such a bad thing." The next morning brought a new complication. Clara was feeding the chickens when she saw him, a lone rider on the horizon, moving slow, studying the ground. Her blood turned to ice as she recognized the familiar slouch in the saddle. Thomas Briggs, Harrison's younger brother. She moved casually toward the barn, then slipped around back and ran for the house. Jed was repairing harness in the kitchen. "Rider coming?" she said tersely. "I know him." One look at her face told him everything. He moved to the window, studying the approaching figure. "Get the spare rifle from the bedroom. Load it." Thomas Briggs rode into the yard like he owned it, dismounting with lazy confidence. Jed met him on the porch, rifle visible but not pointed. "Help you with something?" Thomas's eyes swept the property before settling on Jed. "Looking for someone. Woman about 25, brown hair, hazel eyes. Might be calling herself by a false name. Lots of folks passing through these parts. This one's special. She's my sister-in-law. Ran off 6 months ago. Broke my brother's heart. He just wants her home safe." From inside the house, Clara gripped the rifle tighter. The lies came so easily to him. "Can't help you," Jed said evenly. Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Sure about that. See, I heard tell you got a woman working here. Seems mighty coincidental. My business is my own. Not when it involves harboring a thief. She took money when she left. That makes her a criminal." Jed stepped forward, and something in his movement made Thomas step back. "Even if I knew this woman, which I don't, I'd want to know why she felt the need to run. In my experience, women don't leave good men. You calling my brother a liar? I'm saying you should move along." Thomas's hand drifted toward his gun. "Maybe I should have a look around first." The door opened, and Clara stepped out, rifle steady in her hands. "Hello, Thomas." His face split in an unpleasant grin. Well, Harrison's gonna be real happy to hear I found you." "I'm not going back." "That ain't your choice to make." "Actually, it is." Clara's voice was steady as her hands. "I'm not his property. Whatever he told you. The money I took was mine. Payment for 2 years of cooking, cleaning, and taking his fists when he was drunk. Thomas's face darkened. You always did have a mouth on you. Harrison tried to be patient, but some women need a firm hand, and some men need a bullet. Jed said quietly, You found who you're looking for. Now get gone. She's coming with me. No, Clara said simply. I'm not, and if you try to take me by force, one of us won't leave this yard alive. Thomas looked between them, the woman with steady hands and steadier eyes. The man coiled like a spring beside her. Whatever he saw made him step back. This ain't over, he snarled, mounting his horse. Harrison's got friends, important friends. We'll be back with the law. You do that, Jed replied. Make sure you bring the kind of law that'll listen to what she has to say about your brother. After Thomas disappeared over the horizon, Clara's knees gave out. Jed caught her before she hit the porch, gathering her against him. It's all right, he murmured. You did good. He'll be back, with Harrison, with men, with... Let them come. His arms tightened around her. This time, I'll be here. This time, I won't fail. She pulled back to look at him. I'm not Sarah, remember? You can't save her by saving me. I know. He touched her face with infinite gentleness. But maybe I can save you by being the man I should have been then. Maybe we can save each other. That night, for the first time, Clara slept in the house. The morning after Thomas Briggs's visit, they moved with new purpose. Clara no longer slept in the barn, taking instead the small room off the kitchen. Neither spoke of propriety or what the townspeople might say. There were bigger concerns now. They worked the ranch as partners, preparing for what they both knew was coming. Jed taught Clara to shoot properly, not just to hold a rifle, but to aim true, to breathe through the shot, to reload quick and smooth. She was a fast learner, driven by necessity and something else, a fierce protectiveness that went both ways. The first kiss happened by accident. They were repairing the corral gate, working close in the afternoon heat. Clara reached for a tool at the same moment Jed turned, and suddenly they were there, faces inches apart. The air between them crackled like lightning about to strike. Clara, he breathed, and she heard everything in that single word. Warning, desire, fear, hope. I'm here, she whispered back. I'm real, I'm here. His lips found hers with desperate gentleness, as if she might shatter or disappear. She responded with equal need, her hands tangling in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both were trembling. He started, but she pressed fingers to his lips. Don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for being alive. That night, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. But everything was different now. The careful distance they'd maintained was gone, replaced by something raw and electric. When Clara rose to go to her room, Jed caught her hand. Stay, he said, and this time the word held different meaning. She studied his face in the firelight. Are you sure? I've been dead for 3 years, he said roughly. You make me want to live again. That terrifies me more than any threat Harrison Briggs could make. Clara sank back down beside him, taking his scarred hands in hers. Then we'll be terrified together. They came together like survivors of a shipwreck finding shore, desperate, grateful, achingly tender. In the darkness of his room, they mapped each other's scars, both visible and hidden. Clara traced the bullet wound on his shoulder from his cavalry days. He kissed the fading marks on her arms and ribs, each touch a promise that no one would hurt her again. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to coyotes singing in the distance. Clara's head rested on his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her ear. I never thought, he began, then stopped. What? I never thought I'd feel anything again. After Sarah and Emma, I was so certain my heart was buried with them. His arms tightened around her. Then you showed up, stealing eggs and asking me to punish you like you'd already accepted whatever fate threw at you. And something in me recognized that acceptance, that resignation to pain. Clara propped herself up to look at him. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Two people who forgot how to hope, finding it again in the last place we expected. The preacher would say we're living in sin. Jed murmured, but there was wry humor in his voice. The preacher never had Harrison Briggs's hands around his throat. Clara replied, I'll take whatever sin keeps me alive and gives me this. They dozed fitfully, both too aware of how fragile happiness could be. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the need for vigilance. It was Clara who spotted the dust cloud first, multiple riders approaching from the east. She called to Jed, who was in the barn, and they took positions as they'd planned. Clara at the front window with the spare rifle, Jed on the porch with his Winchester. But as the riders drew closer, Jed relaxed slightly. It's Sam Hutchins, he said, recognizing the lead rider, and Doc Morrison. The group, 5 men from town, rode up slowly, hands visible and peaceful. Sam, the town blacksmith and one of the few men Jed still considered a friend, dismounted first. Morning, Jed, miss. He tipped his hat to Clara, who had emerged cautiously. We're here on unofficial business. Speak plain, Sam, Jed said. Doc Morrison, a thin man with kind eyes, cleared his throat. Thomas Briggs was in town last night, drinking heavy and talking loud. Said he'd found his brother's runaway wife here. Said they'd be coming to collect her today. Also said some other things. Another man added grimly, about what Harrison planned to do when he got her back. Things that didn't sit right with decent folk. Sam nodded. We talked it over. Some of us remember what you were like with Sarah, Jed, how happy you both were. And we see how you've been these past years, like the Walking Dead. If this woman's brought you back to life, he shrugged. Well, that means something. Clara stepped forward. I was married to Harrison Briggs, that's true, but I left because he... She stopped, then lifted her chin. Because he beat me, regular. Because he got drunk and put his hands around my throat, and I saw my death coming. The money I took was less than what he owed me for 2 years of keeping his house and taking his fists. Doc Morrison's face darkened. I've seen such cases before, too many times. He looked at the other men. Any man who'd beat a woman has no claim to call her back. Law might see it different. One of the men warned. Then the law's wrong, Sam said flatly. We came to say this. If the Briggs brothers show up here looking for trouble, they won't find you alone. We'll stand witness to what kind of man Harrison is, if it comes to that. Jed's throat worked. Thank you. All of you. Don't thank us yet, Sam warned. Harrison's got money and connections. This could get ugly. It's already ugly. Clara said quietly. But you've given us something we didn't have before. Hope that justice might actually mean something out here. After the men left, Jed pulled Clara close. You don't have to face him. We could leave. Head west. No, her voice was firm. I'm done running. This is my home now. Our home. I'll fight for it. The rest of the day passed intense preparation. They cleaned weapons, positioned water barrels in case of fire, moved the horses to the far pasture where they'd be safe from stray bullets. As the sun began to sink, they took their positions. Harrison Briggs arrived with the last light, bringing 6 men including Thomas. Clara recognized most of them, hired guns and drifters who'd do anything for whiskey money. Harrison himself had changed little in 6 months, still broad and brutal, with the look of a man who enjoyed causing pain. Clara, he bellowed from beyond rifle range. I know you're in there. Come out now, and I might forgive this foolishness. She stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. Go home, Harrison. You have no claim on me. The hell I don't. You're my wife. I was your victim. There's a difference. Harrison's face darkened. You always did have a smart mouth. I tried to be patient with you, tried to teach you proper ways. But some women are just born wild, and some men are born cruel, Jed said, joining Clara on the porch. You've had your say. Now move on. Not without what's mine. Harrison's hand moved to his gun. You can hand her over easy, or we can do this hard. Either way, she's coming with me, over my dead body. Jed said quietly. Harrison smiled, ugly and confident. That can be arranged. The standoff stretched taut as wire. Then, from behind the house, came the sound of horses. Many horses. Sam Hutchins rode into view, followed by a dozen men from town, all armed. "Evening, Harrison," Sam called out pleasantly. "Funny thing, we heard there might be trouble out here. Thought we'd come see if our neighbor needed help with anything." Harrison's confidence visibly wavered. "This ain't your business, Hutchins. Man threatens one of ours. It becomes our business," Doc Morrison said, moving his horse forward. "See, we've been talking about you, about what kind of man beats his wife. What kind of man makes her run into the wilderness rather than stay under his roof? She's lying. Whatever she told you, I saw the bruises," another man interrupted. "Back when she lived with you. We all did. Just didn't want to interfere in a man's private business. That was wrong of us." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. These men, most of whom barely knew her, were standing up for what was right. After so long feeling alone, the support was overwhelming. "You can't do this," Harrison sputtered. The law's in Madison County. Last I checked." Sam said mildly. "Judge Patterson, specifically, my brother-in-law. He'll be very interested to hear about a man trying to kidnap a woman at gunpoint." The implied threat was clear. Harrison looked around at the assembled men, at Jed and Clara standing united on the porch, at his own hired guns, who suddenly seemed less eager for a fight against such odds. "This isn't over," he snarled finally. "You hear me? Clara, this isn't over." "Yes," she said quietly, clearly. "It is." Harrison wheeled his horse around and spurred it viciously. His men followed, Thomas casting one last venomous look over his shoulder as they disappeared into the gathering darkness. Clara's knees buckled. Jed caught her, holding her as she shook with delayed reaction. Around them, the men from town dismounted, voices calling reassurances, hands patting shoulders in rough comfort. "Thank you," she whispered against Jed's chest. "Thank you all. No need for thanks," Sam said gruffly. "This is what neighbors do. What we should have done for Jed 3 years ago. We won't make that mistake again." That night, after the men had gone and the ranch was quiet again, Clara and Jed lay together in their bed, truly theirs now, claimed through courage and community. "Do you think he'll really let it go?" she asked in the darkness. "Doesn't matter," Jed replied, pulling her closer. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. You, me, and apparently half the town." Clara smiled against his shoulder. "Home," she murmured. "This is really home now." "Yes," he agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. "For both of us." Outside, the prairie wind sang its ancient song, but inside the small ranch house, 2 hearts beat in rhythm. No longer alone, no longer afraid. They had found something worth fighting for, each other, and the life they were building from the ashes of their pasts. The week following Harrison's retreat passed in deceptive calm. Clara and Jed worked the ranch, aware that every peaceful moment might be their last. The town's support had bought them time, but both knew Harrison Briggs wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. It was Jed who first suggested leaving. They were mending harness in the barn, working side by side in comfortable rhythm, when he said quietly, "We could go to California, start fresh where nobody knows our names." Clara's hands stilled on the leather. "Is that what you want?" "I want you safe." She set down her tools and faced him. "I've been running for 6 months. Jed, living like a ghost, looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. I won't do it anymore. Even if staying means facing Harrison in court, even if it means fighting." Her jaw set with determination. "I'm not that scared girl who stole eggs from your henhouse anymore. You helped me find my strength again. Don't ask me to abandon it now." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I can't lose you. Not when I just found you." "Then help me fight," she whispered. "Help me end this properly, so we can live without fear." That evening, Sam Hutchins brought news. He found them on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Talk to my brother-in-law," Sam said without preamble. Judge Patterson says if you want to file formal charges against Harrison for assault and battery, he'll hear the case. But Clara, you'll have to testify, in public, about everything. Clara's fingers tightened on Jed's hand, but her voice was steady. When? Court's in session next week, but there's more. Sam's weathered face was grim. Harrison's been spreading stories, says you're a loose woman who seduced him, then robbed him blind when he tried to reform you. He's got that snake oil salesman lawyer from Lincoln, Marcus Webb. I know Webb, Jed said darkly. He'd defend the devil himself for the right price. What do we do? Clara asked. Sam shifted uncomfortably. Well, Judge Patterson says you'll need representation too. There's a lawyer in Omaha, young fellow named William Morrison, Doc's nephew. He's got a reputation for taking cases others won't touch. We'll wire him tomorrow. Jed decided. After Sam left, they sat in silence as stars began to appear. Finally, Clara spoke. They'll drag my name through the mud, say terrible things. Let them try. Jed's voice was fierce. Anyone who matters knows the truth. Do they? A woman who runs from her husband, takes up with another man without divorce papers. She laughed bitterly. Harrison won't have to work hard to paint me as the villain. Jed turned her to face him. Listen to me. You're the strongest, bravest woman I've ever known. You survived 2 years of hell, escaped with nothing, and built a new life from scratch. If telling your story in court is what it takes to be free, then we'll face it together. That night, their lovemaking held a desperate edge. They came together with fierce urgency, as if trying to store up enough warmth to weather the storm ahead. Afterward, Clara traced the lines of Jed's face in the moonlight. Whatever happens, she whispered, these months with you have been worth everything. Don't talk like that, he said roughly. Don't talk like we're saying goodbye. William Morrison arrived 3 days later, a thin, earnest man in his 30s, with intelligent eyes behind wire spectacles. He listened to Clara's story without interruption, taking careful notes. Mrs. Briggs? Clara, she corrected. Just Clara. He nodded. Clara, I won't lie to you. This will be difficult. The law traditionally favors husbands in marital disputes. But the physical abuse, the threat to your life, these are serious charges, if we can prove them. How? Clara asked. It was always just him and me when it happened. Were there ever marks? Bruises others might have seen? Clara thought back. The mercantile owner's wife, Mrs. Gustafson, she saw bruises on my arms once when I was buying fabric, and Doc Morrison, Harrison called him once when he broke my ribs, said I'd fallen down the stairs. William's eyes sharpened. Doc Morrison, who's here in town? He'd testify to that. I believe he would. Jed said, he's a good man. They spent hours going over every detail, every incident Clara could remember. It was exhausting, reliving those dark days. But Jed stayed beside her throughout, his presence a steady anchor. As William prepared to leave, he turned at the door. One more thing. Harrison will likely bring up your current situation, living here with Mr. Hartwell without benefit of marriage. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but she met his gaze squarely. I'm not ashamed of finding love after surviving hell. William smiled slightly. Good. That's exactly the attitude you'll need in court. The days passed in a blur of preparation. Word spread through the county about the upcoming trial, and opinions were sharply divided. Some supported Clara, having seen or suspected the abuse. Others condemned her for leaving her husband, for taking up with another man, for daring to air private matters in public. One afternoon, while Clara was gathering eggs, she found a note tucked under a stone by the henhouse. Harlots burn in hell. She crumpled it with shaking hands, but said nothing to Jed. He had enough worries, but he noticed anyway. That evening, he found her standing by the window, staring out at nothing. What is it? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him. Maybe we should have run. Maybe I should have kept running forever rather than bring this ugliness into your life. Our life, he corrected firmly. And running isn't living. Clara, You taught me that. I'm scared, she admitted in a small voice. Not of Harrison, not anymore. But of standing up there, telling strangers about my shame. He turned her in his arms. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Nothing. You hear me? The night before the trial, neither of them slept. They lay entwined, talking quietly about everything and nothing. About the ranch, about the future they hoped to build, about the children they might have someday. If they won through this. I want to plant a garden, Clara said against his chest. Vegetables, but flowers too, roses like my mother grew. We will, Jed promised. Yellow ones by the porch where you can see them every morning. As dawn broke, they rose and dressed carefully. Clara wore the best-dressed misses. Gustafson had quietly left on their porch a respectable navy blue that made her look like the lady Harrison had tried to convince everyone she wasn't. Ready? Jed asked, offering his arm. Clara took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and lifted her chin. Ready? The ride to town seemed both endless and too quick. As they approached the courthouse, Clara saw the crowd gathered outside. Some faces were friendly. Sam, Doc Morrison, Mrs. Gustafson. Others were hostile, including a cluster of women who whispered and pointed as they passed. At the courthouse steps, William Morrison waited. Remember, he said quietly. Tell the truth, all of it. Let them see who Harrison Briggs really is. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Harrison sat at the plaintiff's table with Marcus Webb, looking confident in a new suit. His eyes found Clara immediately, promising retribution. Judge Patterson, a stern man with silver hair, called the court to order. As the initial proceedings began, Jed squeezed Clara's hand under the defense table. I'm here, he whispered. Whatever happens, I'm here. Clara nodded, drawing strength from his presence. In a few minutes, she would have to stand and tell her story. The fear, the pain, the desperation that drove her to run. It would be the hardest thing she'd ever done, but as she looked at Jed, at the supporting faces scattered through the crowd, she realized something. She wasn't the same woman who'd crept into a henhouse to steal eggs. That woman had been alone, defeated, ready to accept whatever punishment came. This woman had love, had community, had hope. This woman was ready to fight for her freedom, no matter the cost. The court calls Clara Briggs to the stand, Judge Patterson announced. Clara rose on steady legs, her head high. The time for running was over. The time for truth had come. Clara placed her hand on the Bible, its worn leather cool beneath her palm. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God. Be seated, Judge Patterson instructed. His eyes, sharp behind steel spectacles, studied her with neither kindness nor cruelty, only assessment. William Morrison rose, his young face composed. Mrs. Briggs. Clara, would you tell the court how you came to be married to Harrison Briggs? Clara's voice started soft but gained strength. My parents died of fever when I was 19. I had no family, no money. Harrison owned the boarding house where I rented a room. When I couldn't pay, he offered another arrangement. Marriage. Said he'd take care of me. And did he? A bitter smile touched her lips. He took care to remind me daily that I owed him everything. The first time he struck me was 3 weeks after our wedding. I'd burned the biscuits. Objection. Marcus Webb shot to his feet. Hearsay and slander against my client's character. Overruled. Judge Patterson said, the witness is testifying to her own experience. Continue. Mr. Morrison. William nodded. Can you describe that first incident? Clara's hands clenched in her lap, but her voice remained steady. He backhanded me across the kitchen, said I was worthless, that no one else would have me, that I should be grateful he'd saved me from the streets. She paused. I believed him. I had nowhere else to go. Did the violence escalate? Yes, at first it was slaps, shoves, then closed fists. He was careful to hit where the bruises wouldn't show, my ribs, my back, except when he drank. Then he didn't care where the marks appeared. From the gallery, she heard sharp intakes of breath, misses. Gustafson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Tell us about the night you left," William prompted gently. Clara found Jed's eyes in the crowd, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "January 20th. Harrison had been drinking since noon. Something set him off. I can't even remember what. He grabbed me by the throat, slammed me against the wall, said he was tired of my useless presence, that he'd be better off a widower." Her hand unconsciously went to her neck. "I couldn't breathe. The room went dark around the edges. I knew I was going to die. Then he just let go, laughed, and passed out in his chair." "What did you do then?" "I took $40 from his money box, less than what he'd taken from my wages over 2 years, packed what I could carry, and left. I've been running ever since." William turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Morrison to corroborate the witness's testimony about her injuries." As Clara stepped down, Harrison's lawyer rose like a vulture scenting carrion. "Just a moment. Mrs. Briggs, I have some questions." Clara returned to the witness chair, steeling herself. Webb's smile was cold. "You claim my client abused you, yet you stayed for 2 years. Why?" "Where would I have gone? I had no money, no family. So you stayed for financial security. Then, when you'd had enough, you robbed him and ran to the arms of another man." "Objection," William called. "Counsel is badgering the witness." Sustained. "Mr. Webb, please phrase your questions properly." Webb smoothed his coat. "How long after arriving in Madison County did you take up residence with Jedediah Hartwell?" Heat rose in Clara's cheeks. "I worked for Mr. Hartwell in exchange for food and shelter. I slept in his barn." "And now?" Clara lifted her chin. "Now I sleep in his house. I'm not ashamed of finding kindness after years of cruelty." "Kindness," Webb repeated with a sneer. "Is that what you call it? A married woman living in sin?" "I call it survival," Clara interrupted. "I call it choosing love over fear. If that makes me a sinner in your eyes, so be it. I'd rather be a living sinner than a virtuous corpse." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Patterson banged his gavel for order. Doc Morrison took the stand next, his testimony clinical but damning. "I treated Mrs. Briggs 3 times during her marriage. Broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe bruising. Each time, Mr. Briggs claimed she'd fallen." "Did you believe him?" William asked. Doc's face was grim. "I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. Mr. Morrison. I know the difference between injuries from a fall and injuries from a fist." "Then why didn't you report it?" "Because the law wouldn't have cared. Because Harrison Briggs was a respectable businessman and she was just his wife." Doc's voice carried deep regret. "I failed her then. I won't fail her now." Mrs. Gustafson testified next, her German accent thick with emotion. I saw the bruises. Many times. Once, she tried to buy powder to cover her black eye. She said she walked into a door." The elderly woman's voice hardened. "Doors don't leave knuckle marks." When Harrison took the stand, he was all wounded dignity and righteous indignation. "I loved my wife," he declared. "I gave her everything, a home, security, respectability. Yes, I disciplined her when necessary, as is a husband's right and duty, but I never struck her in anger." "What about the night of January 20th? William cross-examined. Harrison's face darkened. "I'd been drinking." "Yes, we argued. Perhaps I was rougher than intended, but she was hysterical, needed calming. By choking her, I never—" Harrison caught himself, smiled tightly. "If my hands briefly touched her throat, it was only to steady her." "From the gallery," Thomas Briggs called out. "Tell them how she seduced you, how she played the innocent, then showed her true colors." Judge Patterson's gavel cracked down. "Remove that man from my courtroom," as Thomas was escorted out, still shouting. Harrison's composure slipped. "She's a liar and a thief." "She stole from me, abandoned her sacred vows, took up with another man like the harlot she is." "Mr. Briggs," Judge Patterson warned, but Harrison was beyond caution. "I'm the victim here. She should be arrested for theft, for adultery, for making a mockery of marriage." The mask had fallen completely now. revealing the cruel man beneath. The courtroom saw it. The rage, the possessiveness, the violence barely contained. Even Marcus Webb looked uncomfortable. "No further questions," William said quietly. The last witness was unexpected. Jed Hartwell took the stand, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Mr. Hartwell," William began, "you're not required to testify. You understand that?" "I understand, but the court needs to know who Clara is, not who Harrison Briggs says she is." Jed's voice carried the authority of absolute conviction. "When she came to my ranch, she was starving, beaten down, ready to accept whatever punishment came. She'd been taught that was all she deserved." He looked directly at Clara. "But even then, there was strength in her. She worked harder than any hand I've hired. She showed kindness to my animals, dignity in her suffering. When Harrison's brother came threatening, she stood her ground. She chose to face this trial rather than keep running." "And your relationship with her?" Jed didn't flinch. "I love her. Not because she needed saving, but because she saved herself and, in doing so, saved me, too. I was dead inside after losing my first family. Clara brought me back to life." He turned to the judge. "If loving her is a crime, then I'm guilty. But abandoning her to a man who nearly killed her, that would be the real sin." The courtroom was silent as Jed stepped down. Even Harrison had no response to the quiet power of that testimony. Judge Patterson retired to his chambers to deliberate. The weight felt eternal. Clara sat between Jed and William, their hands linked beneath the table. Around them, the gallery buzzed with whispered conversations. When the judge returned, his expression was unreadable. "This court has heard testimony regarding the marriage of Harrison and Clara Briggs. The evidence of physical abuse is compelling and corroborated by multiple witnesses." Harrison started to rise, but Webb pulled him down. "However," the judge continued, "the law regarding marriage and a wife's duties is clear. Under normal circumstances, I would be compelled to order Mrs. Briggs to return to her husband." Clara's heart sank. Jed's hand tightened on hers. "But these are not normal circumstances. The testimony reveals a pattern of escalating violence culminating in what I can only interpret as attempted murder. No law requires a woman to submit to death at her husband's hands." Judge Patterson's gavel rose. "Therefore, I grant Clara Briggs a decree of legal separation from Harrison Briggs, with the following provisions. Harrison Briggs is forbidden from approaching within 100 yards of Clara Briggs. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." The courtroom erupted. Harrison shot to his feet, face purple with rage. "You can't do this. She's my wife, my property." "Mr. Briggs," the judge said coldly, "your words prove exactly why this separation is necessary. Sheriff, if Mr. Briggs isn't out of my courtroom in 10 seconds, arrest him for contempt." As Harrison was forcibly removed, still shouting threats and obscenities, Clara swayed in her chair. Free! She was free. Jed pulled her into his arms as friends surrounded them, Sam pumping Jed's hand, Mrs. Gustafson weeping and blessing them in German, Doc Morrison nodding with grim satisfaction. "It's over," Clara whispered against Jed's chest. "No," he corrected, tilting her face up to his. "It's just beginning." Outside the courthouse, the sun broke through the clouds, bathing the prairie town in golden light. Clara stood on the steps, breathing deeply of air that tasted of freedom and possibility. "What now?" William asked, shaking their hands. Clara looked at Jed, seeing her future reflected in his eyes. "Now we go home. We plant that garden. We live." As they rode back to the ranch, Clara felt the weight of 2 years lifting from her shoulders. There would still be challenges, gossip to weather, a life to rebuild, the slow work of healing. But she had faced her devil in court and won. She had spoken her truth and been believed. Most importantly, she had chosen love over fear, hope over resignation. And in the end, that choice had made all the difference. The first spring at Hartwell Ranch after the trial bloomed with promise. Clara knelt in the freshly turned earth behind the house, her hands deep in soil that smelled of renewal and possibility. True to his word, Jed had helped her plant roses along the porch, yellow ones that caught the morning sun and seemed to glow with their own light. 6 months had passed since the courthouse steps, since freedom had been granted by law and seized by courage. The scars, both visible and hidden, were fading like winter giving way to spring. "Careful with that one," Jed called from where he was mending the garden fence. "It's got thorns." Clara smiled, gently settling the rose cutting into its hole. Everything worth having does. The ranch had transformed under their combined care. The hen house, where she'd once stolen eggs, now provided plenty for them and enough to sell in town. The garden stretched in neat rows: beans, corn, squash, and herbs. But it was the small touches that made it home. Curtains in the windows, flowers on the table, the sound of shared laughter in rooms that had known only silence. Sam Hutchins visited often, bringing news from town and checking on their welfare. On this particular afternoon, he arrived with a letter that would change everything. "From Omaha," he said, handing it to Clara. "Looks official." With trembling fingers, she opened it, Jed reading over her shoulder. It was from William Morrison, their lawyer. "Dear Mrs. Briggs," she read aloud. "I write with news that may interest you. Harrison Briggs was arrested last month in Kansas for assault and battery against another woman. He is currently serving a 5-year sentence. Additionally, the court has granted your petition for full divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. You are, in the eyes of the law, a free woman. Enclosed are the papers confirming the same." The letter fluttered from Clara's nerveless fingers. Free. Completely. Legally free. "Clara?" Jed knelt beside her, concern creasing his brow. "I'm not Clara Briggs anymore," she whispered, then louder, with growing wonder. "I'm not his anymore. Not in any way." Sam cleared his throat, grinning. "Seems like cause for celebration, and maybe for making things official in other ways?" Jed's ears reddened, but his eyes never left Clara's face. "Sam Hutchins, you gossip worse than the church ladies." "Just saying what everyone's thinking," Sam defended. "You two have been living as married folk anyway. Might as well make it proper, now that you can." After Sam left, Clara and Jed sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint familiar colors across the sky. The evening was soft, filled with the sounds of their life together: horses nickering in the pasture, chickens settling for the night, the whisper of wind through new corn. "He's not wrong," Jed said finally. Clara turned to study his face. "About what?" "Making things official." He took her hands, rough with calluses but infinitely gentle. "Clara, you gave me back my life. You showed me that the heart can heal, can love again after loss. I know I'm older, set in my ways, and this ranch isn't much." "Stop," Clara interrupted. "This ranch is home. You are home." "Then marry me," he said simply. "Not because we need to, not because people expect it, but because I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life, knowing you're my wife and I'm your husband, because I want our children to carry the Hartwell name with pride." "Children," Clara's voice caught. "If we're blessed," he said, touching her face. "A daughter with your courage, a son with your kind heart, a chance to build the family we both lost." "Yes," she breathed, then stronger. "Yes, Jedediah Hartwell. Nothing would make me happier than to be your wife." They were married 3 weeks later, on a June morning when the prairie wore its finest clothes of wildflowers and waving grass. The ceremony was simple, held at the ranch with friends from town as witnesses. Clara wore a new dress, soft blue like the sky, with yellow roses from her garden in her hair. Doc Morrison stood as Jed's best man, while Mrs. Gustafson, tears streaming, stood with Clara. Even Judge Patterson attended, offering his blessing to the union he'd helped make possible. "Do you, Clara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" the minister asked. "I do," Clara said, her voice clear and certain. "No fear, no hesitation, only joy." "Do you, Jedediah, Take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jed replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Today and always." The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food brought by neighbors. There was dancing to Sam's fiddle playing, laughter that echoed across the prairie, and a sense of community that wrapped around the couple like a blessing. As night fell and the guests departed, Clara and Jed stood alone in their doorway, their home, their land, their life, all of it honestly earned and freely chosen. "No regrets?" Jed asked, pulling her close. "Only one," Clara admitted. "That it took so long to find you." Inside, the lamp cast warm shadows on the walls. On the mantel sat 2 photographs, one of Sarah and Emma, forever part of Jed's heart, and one taken that day of Clara and Jed, the beginning of their new story. "Tell me again about the garden you want," Jed murmured as they prepared for bed. "About the future, you see." Clara smiled, settling into his arms. "Rows of vegetables stretching to the horizon, an orchard of apple trees, children playing in the yard, 2, maybe 3, a daughter who'll never doubt her worth, a son who'll know gentleness is strength, and us, growing old together, sitting on that porch, watching sunsets, knowing we earned every peaceful moment." She traced patterns on his chest. "Knowing we chose love over fear, hope over despair." 1 year later, as Clara stood in that same doorway with their infant daughter in her arms, she remembered the desperate woman who'd crept into a henhouse to steal eggs. That woman had whispered, "Punish me if you want to," expecting nothing but pain from the world. How far she'd come, how far they'd both come. Jed appeared behind her, his arms encircling both her and little Sarah Emma Hartwell, named for the past but belonging to the future. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "About second chances," Clara replied. "About how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters." The baby stirred, opening eyes the same warm brown as her father's. In the garden, the roses bloomed abundant and wild. The corn stood tall in neat rows. Life flourished where once there had been only survival. "Come inside," Jed said softly. "It's getting cool." Clara took one last look at the land stretching endlessly before them, not empty now, but full of promise. Then she turned and followed her husband into their home, where lamplight pushed back the darkness and love had transformed 2 broken hearts into one whole family. Through the window, the stars appeared one by one in the vast Nebraska sky, and in the small ranch house that had witnessed such transformation. A mother sang softly to her daughter while her husband held them both, and the prairie wind carried their contentment across the endless grass. They had started with theft and desperation. They had endured threats and trials, but in the end, love had won. Not the easy love of fairy tales, but the hard-earned love of 2 people who'd seen the worst life could offer and chosen to build something better together. Home, family, hope. Everything Clara had thought lost forever when she'd fled into the night. Everything Jed had buried with his first family. All of it reborn in a simple ranch house on the Nebraska prairie. Proof that sometimes the greatest treasures come from the most unexpected beginnings. In the barn where Clara had once slept as a fugitive, hay was now stored for winter. The hen house that had witnessed their first meeting provided eggs for their table. Every corner of the ranch told their story, of pain transformed to purpose, of loneliness becoming love, of 2 lost souls finding their way home to each other. And as night deepened over the prairie, the Hartwell family slept peacefully, no longer haunted by the past, no longer afraid of the future. They had faced their demons and won. They had spoken their truth and been heard. Most importantly, they had chosen each other, again and again, until choosing became as natural as breathing. The Wild West had tested them with its harsh realities and unforgiving judgments. But it had also given them the freedom to remake themselves, to build something lasting from the ashes of what was lost. And in that freedom, they had found not just survival, but a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future bright with possibility. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. I hope Clara and Jed's story touched your heart as much as it touched mine in the telling. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as folks did in those frontier days. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and redemption from America's untamed past. Share your thoughts. What part of Clara and Jed's journey spoke to you? Until we meet again around the campfire, keep the spirit of the frontier alive in your hearts.